Hey, hi everyone. Welcome again to AuthorStory. I'm Alexander Lim, your host. And for this episode, I'm interviewing Kari Wagner-Peck, author of the book Not Always Happy, An Unusual Parenting Journey. And for those of you following along who are interested, you can go over now to the Amazon link in the description below the video and check out or get a copy of her book. So Kari, welcome to AuthorStory. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you so much.
Cool, you're welcome. So, Kari, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your author story?
Well, I started writing about our family in 2010.
Hmm.
We adopted our son through the Maine foster care system, and I actually started the blog the day we adopted him. When you have a child who's still in foster care status, you can't even share online Facebook photos.
Oh, okay.
Because the child's actually a guardian of the state. So once we adopted him, my husband and I, during that year, we had to wait for the official adoption. We realized that, our son has Down syndrome. And so we realized, his biggest disability was actually what people thought of him, not his Down syndrome.
Right.
And so I wanted to be able to express that to other people in a useful way. So I decided to tell the story of our family.
Okay.
And I started the blog Atypical Son in 2010. And so that's been going on about 7 years. And about a little over a year ago, I realized, I have people that were following me, that were interested. It seemed like I was making some kind of impact. And so I wanted to turn it into a book. And I got an agent who helped me find my publisher, Central Recovery Press. And they got the story is my husband and I decided we would raise our son with Down syndrome the same way we would any child.
Okay.
And the publisher really related to that, this idea of accepting people for who they are and, focusing on the diversity of it and the inclusion of the story. And that's really what happened. And, what's interesting is, like 30% of my readership on the blog aren't parents. And most of the people who read my blog don't have children with Down syndrome. So I think I was relating a story that had a universal interest, even though it was sort of quirky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can say then that you didn't really write this out like with one person in mind. You just wrote this memoir out, and it just gained universal acclaim then.
I think so. I mean, I'm really, I just got a review. The library, the National Librarians Journal, tomorrow is going to publish a review. It says recommended for all parents. That really blew me away. I mean, I think it's recommended for all human beings, but but I really liked that they got that. This is about relating to the human experience in a funny, authentic way. And yeah, I think not having sort of a niche, however you want to say that, audience really freed me up.
Okay, cool. So, you did mention that you did want to write. This book came about because of all the response to all the blogs you wrote. Was there any like particular aha moment where you realized, you should write this book?
I think I don't. I think I think it was more cumulative. It was sort of like, what's the next level? Like if I really, my life's mission, my avocation is to help change the way people see neurodiversity, that we include people who are neurologically different from the norm. And I thought, I can only do so much on this blog.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I have greater impact? And so I think it was this cumulative sort of awakening.
Okay, okay. And you did mention that you write blogs, but I know you also write articles. You've written articles for Sydney Morning Herald, I believe, and the Huffington Post, and publications like that.
Yeah.
Was working.
Uh,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, you go. Sorry.
I just needed to ask, was working on a memoir different from the way you would write an article or a blog?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because that was really the learning curve for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even my articles tend to have an arc.
Mm-hmm.
And my blog posts definitely have an arc that I want it to, even if it's a small one.
Right.
And so what it was taking stories. I bet 40% is from the blog for the book, but it's the whole story. So instead of trying to write an incident in 500 to 750 words, it was like, oh my gosh, I can put all the content. I could make this story arc bigger. I can include my emotions, the emotions of other people involved, what it looked like, what was the impact later. So it was really that was my biggest learning curve, is how to create a larger arc where I can. What I wanted to have happen is I wanted it to feel like you were sitting at my kitchen table.
Right.
And I was telling you this story, that you weren't just hearing it, you were feeling it and you were pulled in. And so that was a terrific experience.
Mm, okay, cool. And of course, I mean, it shows, I reckon, in the way the book is written and the way it's been received.
It is like so many people have said, I couldn't put this book down. I read it in two settings. One woman with four children contacted me and she said, I haven't finished a book in years. I read this in 2 days and I feel like you owe me childcare and house cleaning because I just ignored everyone.
Okay.
And, so I think, I did want it to have a sense of suspense and adventure and, to be caught up in the moment and to hear that that's happening is so important, because I think change really happens on that kind of spirit emotional level more than the intellectual.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Got that. Cool. So, Carrie, I'd like to ask you this question. Because you have done something that a lot of adopted parents won't do, and that's adopt a child with Down syndrome. I mean, most adopted parents look for a kid who's normal, what we call normal and stuff like that. What was it exactly that made you decide to adopt such a child?
It was a spiritual feeling moment for my husband and I. We said we did not want a child with a disability.
Hmm.
Um, basically, we said we could take somebody who is colorblind or left-handed. We were like, we can't do this.
Right.
And our foster care worker left us a voicemail and described this little boy, and then just sort of casually said, and he has Down syndrome.
Okay. Okay.
And so as my husband and I were listening to this voicemail together, we both had this really powerful sense of calm.
Hmm.
I can't explain it. I mean, maybe it was some sort of heart connection. We knew this was our child because he certainly is.
Right.
But we just followed that calm and we really tried to stay connected to it when things got difficult. And I think sometimes life comes to you. I
Hmm.
know there's a lot about intention in the world and making your dreams come true, but I think sometimes life comes to you, and that's beautiful.
Okay. Cool. So did did Thorne's needs play any part in the adoption process? For example, were you asked to give other certain requirements in order to adopt him or anything like that?
Well, I mean, adoption through foster care is pretty rigorous to begin with, regardless of the child. You're vetted by Homeland Security twice,
Right.
once as a foster parent and once as an pre-adoptive.
Uh-huh.
You have the fire marshal come to your home. You have social workers come and interview you about your parenting philosophy and your relationship with your partner, and then they interview your references. And so it wasn't, there was only one moment. There was only one moment where somebody really questioned, why are you doing this?
Right.
And, I went to that, well, it just feels right. And, our foster care worker fortunately stepped in and said, these two people, they don't have any other children.
Mm,
They could provide a lot of dedication and time, and that's what Thorin needs. And then it was taken care of. It was like that was enough.
okay, so there wasn't any like any other special requirements. It's just like you went through the normal process of adopting a child through the foster care system.
It is. It is. I mean, I think what we made really clear is that we loved Thorin before we ever met him. We heard about him in January of 2009. We saw a photo a month later in February, and then we didn't meet him until the end of April. And during that time, he was this constant sort of ache, just almost like, waiting for the delivery.
Right.
And so I think that was so apparent to people that our feelings were so true.
Okay, nice, nice, cool. So I have to ask, did you give him the name Thorin, or was Thorin already named Thorin before you adopted him?
Thorin came with the name Thorin.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Because
It's a cool name.
yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering if you guys gave it to him who was the fan of The Hobbit or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think, one of his biological parents.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. So, Kari, I'd like to digress a bit. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of folks out there, our listeners, possibly myself included, who have not had much by way of interaction with a child with Down syndrome. And I'm sure you know there are a lot of sensational stories, impressions of what it's like to raise a child or interact with one. So, just to clear up a lot of likely over dramatized sensational impressions you might have, can you give us a feel of what it's like to raise and live with Thorin?
Well, I think most of our parenting and our experience is probably like anyone else's.
Okay.
Thorin has, the same interests and, typical interests that, now he's 10-year-old boys have.
Right.
He loves the Avengers. He likes mummies and zombies and Frankenstein.
Right.
He he loves reading. We homeschool. He enjoys math,
Mm,
which is shocking to me because I hated it.
okay.
I think the differences come from processing information. So, people with Down syndrome can have, not all, but can have, processing delays in information.
Hmm.
So, what I noticed, and I didn't realize this until Soren became our son, is that the typical talker talks a lot.
Okay.
But somebody who has difficulty processing information, and this can also be people with ADHD and other processing challenges, is they don't know what to focus on because you're giving too much information.
Mm,
The other thing is the response rate. My husband has ADHD, and so there are very similar things between he and Thorin. Both, I notice, need time to respond. I'm a super processor.
hmm.
They're, they're much more deliberate.
Hmm.
It's waiting. I mean, sometimes I'll wait 30 seconds before Thorn formulates what he's going to say.
Mm-hmm.
In a typical conversation, we're always jumping in and guessing. Oh, what is it this? Is it this?
Mm-hmm.
That you're just interrupting that flow and process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think patience and taking time is very, very important. I mean, Thorin understands what's being said, but to respond to it, he needs to be more thoughtful. And the other thing is presume competence. You
Okay.
know, if your idea of somebody with Down syndrome is that they're not smart or they're dull or, you know, you're you're going to convey that somehow
Mm-hmm.
in your interaction. And I think you just presume this person is competent.
Right. Well,
Um,
because that's like
yeah,
the usual image that you'd think of when you think Down syndrome. Oh my gosh, this child's not competent. He can barely talk. Something like that. That's the usual sensational image that people have.
right. And I think we attribute all this, like our son, Thorin has apraxia, which is a motor planning situation. So he knows what he wants to say. And actually the process of saying it. So imagine your head is full of all these thoughts, but it can only be fed through a very tiny straw.
Mm-hmm.
And so he will pick the word. If he wants to have ice cream, he'll just say ice cream, because I want to have ice cream, please, becomes a challenge in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if people realize that's not an intelligence thing,
Yeah.
that's an intelligibility thing. And to not, to be patient and realize we're not all super processors and we're not all super talkers.
Okay. You
And when
bring.
I say super, I don't mean positive.
I got that. Well, you did bring up a good point between intelligibility and intelligence.
Yes.
There might be some for our listeners who might not be aware of the distinction between the two. So can you just give us a short distinction between the two?
I think intelligence is the capacity to understand and integrate information
Mm-hmm.
and to learn. And Thorin has intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligibility is being understood. And if you have a communication challenges
Mm-hmm.
and delays, so then intelligibility becomes a shared goal by the speaker and the listener. And so, because that's sort of the human contract, right? Part of that. If you really want to communicate with someone, you have to take responsibility for that conversation too.
Right.
And so intelligibility, being understood in the world, happens between whoever's in that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I'm kind of getting here then is that Thorin is a child with decent intelligence, but he just does not communicate the way we normally would, the way what we would call normal. Is this correct?
I think that's or timely, maybe even timely.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, because we are so focused. I mean, societally, we're so focused on doing everything fast,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Everything has to happen right away.
Right.
Um, and I don't think that's actually good for any of us.
Mm-hmm.
I think slowing down communication and understanding is probably a good idea for the rest of us. And Thorin just needs more time. And I think understanding like what somebody's intelligence is, like if you wanted, like, I don't even think about in terms of IQ or that kind of thing with anyone.
Okay.
I mean, you could know somebody who has a really high IQ, but they make horrible decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're a horrible person. And I won't name names. But, it really has to do with a holistic approach to the human being. So the human being is about the ability to understand and be understood and have a passion towards learning. Thorin has a passion to learn.
Mhm.
He loves reading books.
Mm.
Right now he's really into George Washington.
Wow. Okay.
So I think instead of is there some is there some range that we find decent or good or acceptable, or should we look at the whole person and see what their understanding of the world is?
Mm. Okay. Interesting. That's definitely a different viewpoint from how we normally regard people like Thorin. Then it's definitely a holistic rather than just focusing on okay, this guy's got this condition.
Right, because he lives with Down syndrome. He isn't Down syndrome.
Mm.
I'll have people say to me, "Oh, I know a Down syndrome child." And it's like, no, you know a child who has Down syndrome.
Mhm.
Because person first language says Thorin, loves baseball and he likes dancing and theater. And by the way, he has Down syndrome.
Mhm.
It is a part of his human experience.
Mhm. Okay. Cool. So let me go a little bit into the book. For you, what was the easiest part of writing this book? Was it a particular instance of the way you wrote the book? What is the easiest part of writing it for you?
I almost feel like I'm having this conversation inside of me.
Okay.
So a lot of these stories in the book I had told out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do a performance piece of Not Always Happy.
Okay.
And so I'm a storyteller. And I'll be really honest with you, I like getting a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I was a little kid, I liked working a room. And my whole family sort of encouraged that.
Right.
And so I would tell these stories and elicit the response that I had anticipated, and then turned it, put it on the written page. And it was a fun process because I felt like, you know, I um, I just I got to experience it in a really cool way.
Mm-hmm.
I was having these conversations. I mean, my husband was like, I was at all of those things. And he goes, you captured the person, the feeling. And I didn't have that. That recall came to me. And I almost feel like it came to me like in a really deep, awesome way.
Right. Cool. So let me ask you the inverse of that. Was there any part of the book that was very challenging for you to write, very difficult for you to write, to get across?
There's an incident in the book where Thorin was in a preschool early on. We'd only had him a few months. And I was walking down the hall. I arrived early. I forgot to tell them. And I heard like blood curdling screaming
Mm-hmm.
coming from behind the door. I mean, it was really, like horror film scream. Like my heart started racing. And I opened the door because I was like, somebody is in distress
Right.
behind that door.
Right.
And it was my son
Okay.
who was strapped in a chair,
Uh-huh.
and he couldn't move, just his head and like his shoulders. And he was drenched in sweat. He was hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
He was 2.5. He was 24 inches long, maybe 20 pounds. He was a miniature. He was a very, very, very little boy. And sitting next to him was this woman reading calmly in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had just, I started yelling. I unstrapped him. I was holding him, comforting him. And I said, "What is going on here?" And she said, "Speech therapy." And
Okay.
so that desire to hurt her was so, you know, I said, "Why did you do this?" And she goes, "He tries to get away."
Mm-hmm.
Now, restraint and seclusion are two words people with disability understand quite well because it happens 3/4 of the time in educational settings. It happens to somebody with a disability. What I didn't know at the time is that a study was done. 375 1,000 times
Mm-hmm.
restraint was used
Mm-hmm.
illegally.
Mm-hmm.
3/4 of the time was children with disabilities. So this woman, instead of sort of figuring out how to entertain a 2-year-old to engage on a book,
Right.
she just strapped him to a chair and read to him, and ignoring his hysteria.
Wow.
And writing that again, like, I wish I had called the police.
Mm.
That's what I should have done, is called the police. And I was a parent for 2 months. And to this day, I feel like, we did report it. Nothing was done.
Right.
But I didn't know that that was a common practice
Mm-hmm.
with people with disabilities.
Right.
And I didn't know what to do in the moment.
Right.
And writing about it brought all that shame and horror up.
Okay. Okay. Well, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Okay. So, Kari, let's say you met up with a person or even a couple who's considering adopting a child with special needs, whatever that might be. It could be Down syndrome, ADHD, whatever. Or you met up with a couple who already had a child with those kind of special needs. And you only had enough time to tell those people one thing about their child and, their present condition. What would be that one thing you would tell them, and why would you tell them that?
Um, I think I'd say, to see your child as more than their diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
To see their child holistically, the same way all human beings want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
That we're a collection of our parts.
Right.
And also keep the bar high.
Mm-hmm.
Don't 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 decide what the future holds.
Mm-hmm.
We None of us know what the future holds. You know, I think those are the two things.
Okay, interesting, interesting, cool. So, in this last few minutes of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you would like to share to inspire our listeners?
Um, you know, I think, I've touched on this already, but you know, I think until we accept that neurodiversity is like any other diversity, whether it's race or gender, LGBT, religious, until we allow that understanding, because neurodiversity and disability on the whole intersect all those communities.
Mm,
All communities have disability. It is a natural part of our human experience, and it isn't to be feared or pitied. It's just different. And I think doing that as a society, the same way it enriches us to include and accept all other differences, this just really kind of opens up the floodgates, because it does intersect with every community. And it's something that makes us all more one.
mm. Okay, nice. Nice words right there. Great words.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, in closing, then, the book is Not Always Happy, An Unusual Parenting Journey. The authors are guest Kari Wagner-Peck, and you can find her book on Amazon and also on her website, which is kariwagnerpeck.com. That's KariWagnerPeck.com. So, Kari, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being an author story. It was very insightful having you with us today.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, if any of you listeners want to know more about this topic, please feel free to go ahead and check out Not Always Happy, An Unusual Parenting Journey, which you can do so right now by going to the Amazon link in the description below the video. And if you'd like to follow our author interviews on YouTube, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. So bye for now, everyone. I'll be back on Author Story next time with another inspiring author.